morning. How are we all feeling? I'm happy to hear that. First and foremost, I just wanted to say thank you so much for Girl Organization. I've been kind of checking in periodically with Ms. Priestley, and she's been amazing to work with. And I just feel so incredibly encouraged to be here present with so many incredible young girls and women mobilizing efforts in their preferred interest of field, listening about STEM, period poverty, and many other social justice issues that are so incredibly important in today's time. So today's focus, as I stated in the introduction, my name is Stephanie Diaz and I'm a mental health therapist and associate clinical social worker. So today we're going to be focusing on how to be your best self. Next slide. So today we're going to be covering 3 different competencies. We're going to be discussing boundaries, we're going to be discussing self-empowerment, and we're going to be most importantly discussing strategies on how to deal with pressures. Next slide. Okay, so who am I? My name is Stephanie Diaz. I'm born and raised from a small town called Thousand Oaks from a suburban area about 20 minutes north from LA. I am a proud Latina Mexican American. I was raised by a single mom, and growing up as a family, we quickly had to assimilate into this country. We had to learn the language. I witnessed my mom working 2 jobs, working tirelessly, cleaning houses, just trying to give us the very best that she could. Growing up, we were witnessing systemic disparities, which essentially kind of cultivated my passion to become what I knew growing up, which was an advocate. Also, be the person that could be the bridge to help other people essentially become the best version of themselves. So that's what kind of leads me with my work here today. So I primarily provide services, individual psychotherapy in English and in Spanish, to underserved communities, specifically Latinos and people of color in the San Fernando Valley. I work from ages from 6 years old up to 60 years old. So I have a very wide range of clientele. Next slide. Okay, so this is one of my absolute favorite quotes. So where attention goes, energy flows. And the reason why I wanted to highlight is because it is a reminder of how impactful our attention can be depending on where we do or do not place it. So we're going to be actually working on applying this exercise with the 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 method. Next slide. Okay, so what is the 5, 4, 3, 2, 1? So now I would like everyone's attention. So we're all going to engage in this exercise individually and internally. So essentially what we're doing here is we're going to be grounding ourselves. And we're going to be placing attention to the present moment and being curious of the present moment. So I want you to individually start engaging in this exercise by potentially identifying 5 things that you can see that is around you right now. 4 things that you could potentially touch. 3 things that you could potentially hear. 2 things that you can potentially smell. And then 1 thing that you can potentially taste. So by a show of hands, did this exercise help you engage into the present moment right now? Good. So a lot of the times, through kind of my work, I've realized a lot of individuals are focused either on the past or the future and have a really difficult time engaging in the present moment. This is a tangible tool that I've seen to create a lot of benefits to help allow us to redirect our concentration in the present moment. Next slide. Okay, so we're going to be doing this next exercise, another grounding exercise, collectively as a team. So I want you to go ahead and just follow my lead. So I want you to put your right hand over your chest. And then I want you to put your left hand over your stomach. Okay? So we're going to be doing a deep breathing exercise. I want you to inhale through your nose. Hold for 2. 1, 2. Exhale for 3. Let's do that again. So let's inhale through our nose. Hold for 2. Exhale for 3. Let's do it one more time. So inhale for 3. Hold for 2. Exhale for 3. Okay. Next slide. Okay, so what is mental health? So mental health essentially is discussing about our emotional and psychological well-being. So it focuses on our thoughts, feelings, and behaviors and how they're all interconnected. And it can also determine the way that we handle stress, have interpersonal relationship, or just simply make choices in our everyday life. Next slide. Okay, so this is going to be the first competency, boundaries. Can anyone raise their hand if they think they know what a boundary is? Okay. Now I want you to raise your hand if you have no idea what a boundary is. For those who did raise their hand of saying that they do know what a boundary is, would you mind maybe sharing what comes up for you when you think of the word boundary?
Just knowing what you're comfortable with and like knowing your limits.
Yeah, exactly. Was there anyone else that wanted to share? Okay, so yes, you are spot on. So when it comes to boundaries, essentially it is the actions that we take. It has nothing to do with what someone else or does not do. I think a lot of the times the misconception is, well, when I hear two people talking about boundaries, it's like, well, they're not doing what I need, they're doing this and doing that. And in reality, it has nothing to do with what someone else does, because we are essentially are going to be exercising our autonomy. We are going to be creating what, like she stated, what we are comfortable or not comfortable with. And essentially, what are our limitations? So I want you kind of to think about a fence. So think about two houses, maybe it's separated by a fence. And that's essentially what a boundary is. It's maintaining this distance. So next slide. So there are many different examples that I listed here above. So a boundary could be something as simply as saying the word no, and a reminder that no is a full sentence if you are simply not comfortable with that, and exercising that. Another boundary could be, let's say, I do not appreciate when someone raises their voice at me. So what I'm going to do is, if the second I hear that, or the second that I see it, well then I'm going to physically remove from the situation. Because boundaries are, we may not be able to control what someone else does or doesn't do, but we are in control of the way that we act and react in different environment situations. And then next slide. Okay. So self-empowerment. By show of hands, do you have an idea what self-empowerment means? Would any of you like to share?
Thinking about how you feel and taking care of your body based on what your needs instead of what everyone else wants to do.
Yeah, exactly. So essentially, exercising that autonomy and exercising what is in control of us. So for today, what we're actually going to be focusing on is the connection between self-empowerment but also self-awareness. So in order to increase self-empowerment, it is incredibly beneficial to be self-aware of the way that we think, feel, and behave, because ultimately, that is going to be impacting the decisions that we are making for ourselves. Next slide. Okay, so this is called the cognitive triangle. So as you see, the arrows are kind of going, they're interchangeable, they're going either way. So it's talking about thoughts, feelings, and behavior. So, by a show of hands, prior to me discussing this, did anyone have an idea or understand how thoughts, feelings, and behavior are all interconnected? Did anyone not? Or so? Yeah. I would say that before I kind of dive into this field, to be honest, I'll be transparent, I kind of had no idea. I just knew that I was feeling angry, I was feeling upset, but I didn't really understand the magnitude of the way that I was thinking could actually impact the way that I was feeling and behaving and reacting in different situations. So it all essentially starts with our thought process. And the reason why it's interchangeable is a lot of the times we may be experiencing a situation, we may not recognize the immediate thought. We may recognize first the feeling. We may recognize first the physiological symptom of feeling shaky or having sweaty palms. It's kind of different for every single person. It's a very unique and individual experience. Next slide, please. Okay. So this is just the psychoeducation page on the cognitive triangle. So I wanted to review this with you. So essentially, what is a cognitive triangle? we're going to be discussing the connections between a scenario, thought, feelings, and behavior. So a scenario is essentially anything that may happen when we trigger the cognitive triangle. So thoughts. What are thoughts? So thoughts are essentially interpretations of a situation. I don't know about you, but I know I experience so many thoughts throughout the day, and sometimes I'm like, what was that? What was I thinking there? But we can have many different interpretations of the same situation. This is why if we were to put two different people in the same situation, we may have completely two different outcomes. And that could be for a variety of reasons, due to socioeconomic status, cultural factors, religion factors, a variety of factors. So that is what thoughts are. So what are feelings? So feelings essentially is the emotion that is kind of cultivated based on what you were thinking. And that could also be tied to like physiological symptoms. So like let's say if you're feeling nervous, for example, you might feel like your heart is racing a little bit, you might feel a little bit of shaking hands. That is essentially what the feeling is. The behavior is essentially the way you're going to be acting or reacting based on what kind of started first with the initial thought. So next slide. Okay. So we're going to be doing this exercise together. Okay? So the scenario is a friend who I usually am friendly with walks by me and without saying hello. So we're going to go to the actual thought process. So the actual thought was, what did I do wrong? Why is she mad at me? That made me feel hurt. That made me feel offended. So what was the behavior? I couldn't stop thinking about it. I acted coldly later towards my friend. So just because we have these initial authentic thoughts does not mean that we cannot challenge ourselves and have alternative thoughts, as we call them under the cognitive triangle. So let's look back at that same situation, but we're going to try this alternative thought. So the alternative thought is, she didn't even notice me. She must have a lot on her mind. That sounds a little bit lighter, right? It maybe makes me feel neutral, maybe it makes me feel unfazed. And maybe the behavior is, I don't give the situation a second thought. And I just kind of let it go. So kind of going through this kind of cognitive triangle, it can be very empowering. Because essentially what is highlighted here that we have the power to choose of how much something impacts us or does not impact us. Okay, next slide. Okay, so as you see here, there is 5 different scenarios, and they're actually in the middle of your tables. I printed out copies. So what I would like you guys to do is, I would like you guys to choose a pair, so working groups of 2, and you're going to be practicing this cognitive triangle with your partner. Next slide. Okay. So essentially, I'm going to be providing at least 10 minutes. Kind of closer to that time, I'm going to be giving you a check-in to see how things are going. Okay? Yes. So I wanted to clarify. Choose one scenario. Okay? If you have a question, just raise your hand. I know personally when I was going through school, being a first-generation student, I put a lot of pressure on myself because I felt that my mom's immigration sacrifice would have to be worth for something. And that unfortunately made me put a lot of pressure on myself. And I was more so experiencing the initial thought of, I'm going to fail and I'm not going to do well. But I'm happy to hear that you guys were able to engage in the process and found that through creating an alternative thought, you were actually able to have relief for yourself. Okay, thank you. Could I have a volunteer for scenario B?
It was an individual coordinated event, and so the scenario was an individual coordinated event, and not many people showed up. And our original thought was, oh, they didn't show up because of me, because I did something wrong, or they just don't like me. And the feeling was like sadness, probably like anger, and like loneliness. And the behavior was maybe not throwing in bed again and being upset with the people and like kind of giving up. Our alternative thought was maybe they were busy, maybe they weren't interested in like the subject, or there was something else going on. And our feeling with that was more like it was still like sadness, but also like a little more neutral and a little more like, oh, I can do something better next time. And the behavior was more like, okay, maybe I'm going to increase publicity next time. Maybe I would ask them, okay, what happened? And if they were like, oh, I just like really am not interested in this specific thing, then I would like do that differently next time.
Right. Okay. Thank you so much for that. I'm not sure if you guys are catching on a theme, but as human beings, we kind of tend to go to the worst case scenario. So we heard that was scenario A, we heard that was scenario B. But the reality is that we can have many different interpretations to the very same situation. And when we kind of challenge ourselves to create the alternative thought, we're actually realizing that, you know what, maybe it had nothing to do with me, and maybe there was an alternative possibility to what actually happened. Okay, thank you. How about for scenario C?
Okay. So our scenario was an individual witnessed the clear protesting the LGBTQ+ rights and has been brutally mistreated by bystanders. The initial thought might be, I better not get involved because I don't want that to happen to me. The feeling would be fear and intimidation, and the behavior would just be bystanding on the side and not intervening.
And then for our alternative thought process, we said that if we were not to handle our views, we would want somebody to stand up for us and push to the same, which would provide a feeling of courage and determination to stand up for the person who is treated. The behavior could be harnessing that courage to say something and to make us.
Thank you for that, and thank you for your insight on how your experience was with completing the cognitive triangle. I think being a part of the summit and just kind of listening to the work that you do, I think this might be actually a reality that happens, and I personally have witnessed it too. And it can be difficult to find the words, find the courage to speak up when we're seeing injustice. But initially, we can have those initial thought processes that might inhibit us from actually doing what maybe we are really passionate about. But again, it's creating those alternative thoughts to kind of give us that encouragement and confidence, essentially, to speak up. So thank you for that. So can I have a volunteer for scenario D?
Okay, so scenario D was a woman who was called back for a group interview for a supervisor position and realized they were the only woman in the room. So our actual thought was, why am I the only woman here being worried that people will treat you differently or discriminate against you? The feeling was anxious and overwhelmed, and the behavior was acting nervous during the interview and not doing its best. And then the alternative thought process was, I'm just as capable as other candidates here, feeling neutral, and trying your best and keeping an open mind.
I like that. So I think this is definitely something that continues to be impactful and is occurring in today's society. But as one of the other speakers said, if you're not at the table, you're on the menu. And the reality is that we need many more women in all of these different types of fields, whether it be STEM, medicine, mental health, activism, whatever your desire is. It's necessary for us to be in the room because we also do have the ability and power to create that change that we want to see in the world. Okay, so now can I get a final volunteer for the last scenario, which is scenario E?
Scenario E is an individual's best friend didn't text them back, but saw they were posting videos on TikTok. Our initial thought was, why did they ignore me? Why do they hate me? What did I do? And we were feeling betrayed and offended, also hurt, and our behavior was bad. We reported the TikTok and sent it back to them with an amazing message.
Our alternate thought was that they didn't see the text, or that they forgot to respond, or they just like didn't hit send on the message. We were feeling neutral, and we could have just liked the TikTok or just left it alone.
Okay, so very drastic behaviors based on what we initially were thinking with that scenario. We went from blocking the radio, reporting it, to actually like, you know what, maybe they just didn't see it. Can I just get a show of hands? Has there been times when someone has texted you and you just are so getting busy that you forgot to respond? 1000%. I think we can all be guilty of that. I think realizing that we are all human, and the reality is 80% of the time, we're kind of thinking about ourselves. We're not really thinking about what other people are doing, what they're saying. So realizing how that impactful can be and how we do have the power to change that interpretation of our thoughts. Next slide, please. Okay, so this slide focuses on our mind, body, and balance. So I do view mind and body one as a whole. So I talk a lot about the pillars of wellness to be able to achieve the self-empowerment and be the best version of yourself. So this can look very differently for many different people. So things that may stimulate my mind, for example, such as like reading or listening to different types of podcasts on social justice issues may not stimulate your mind. But the reality is kind of figuring out like what works for me. Also something that I talk about too is our body. So our bodies are essentially our vehicle. If we're not taking care of ourselves, if we are not pouring into our cup before we even try to pour into others, I personally need to do my hot yoga class at least like a few times a week to be able to do this kind of work, because that's essentially what makes me feel mentally and physically grounded to continue doing what I do. And I would love to get a volunteer to hear maybe what is something that you feel kind of stimulates your mind or your body. Ooh.
I like to dance.
Any particular type of dance? Nice. You don't want to see me dance, I really got but that's really great to hear. Any other volunteer?
I also do a hip hop dance fitness class with my mom, but for my mind, I really love listening to the Daily podcast by the New York Times. They like educate you about one relevant issue in 20 minutes, and then give you here's what else you need to know today. And I just love to start my day that way.
All right, next slide.
Oh, is there someone else? This one here.
Okay.
I like to go on runs because I feel like that really just clears my mind, and also like I can get my energy out.
I like that. Thank you so much for sharing. So I wanted to move forward and teach you guys another strategy on how to deal with pressure. So this is called brain. So let's think about the scenario. For example, let's say I don't get admitted into my #1 university. So the R stands for recognize. So recognize, what am I feeling? Maybe I feel discouraged. So, and then most importantly, allowing that feeling. The only way to get over something is to essentially go through it and allowing ourselves to actually feel that emotion. The I is going to be investigate. So why do I feel so discouraged? Is it because I put pressure on myself? Is it because my parents have put pressure on me? And kind of being curious with yourself and again, engaging in that self-awareness. The N, which I think is the most important part of this acronym, is nurture. It's really important to nurture ourselves too as we're experiencing a variety of complex feelings. So for me, I love going outside and maybe getting a 15-minute walk at least and listening to one of my favorite podcasts. That makes me feel really nurtured and feels like my feelings are being validated. Next slide. Okay, so now we kind of started the presentation with grounding ourselves, and I want to kind of start closing it out with grounding ourselves again. So we're going to be doing somatic exercises. What are somatic exercises? Essentially, somatic exercises are Eastern practices that is connecting the mind to the body and is essentially viewing it as one. So I wanted for us to do it together as a team. So I want you guys to follow my lead, and I want you to tilt your head to your left. So if everyone can kind of look up here, the reason why we're tilting it is because I want to expose your vagus nerve. So the vagus nerve is the largest nerve that is connected to the parasympathetic system. This nerve holds many different functions, but one of actually the most important functions is that it actually has the ability to impact our mood. So studies have shown to stimulate our vagus nerve can actually improve our mood. So doing something as simple as like for 15 seconds each, resting our neck. So doing something like this. I know it feels a little weird. So I'm going to be kind of We're actually stimulating our vagus nerve. So now let's go ahead and tilt to the other side. We'll be doing the same exact thing. Stimulating the vagus nerve. Okay, now switch again, and now we're going to be pulling on our right earlobe. Again, stimulating that vagus nerve. Okay, now again, switch. Okay, and now my personal favorite is the butterfly. So doing something as simple as like this. These are exercises I like to implement if I'm feeling nervous, let's say an exam is coming up, because we're stimulating our vagus nerve and it's actually helping us feel more grounded. And physical touch to ourselves is actually shown to be really beneficial too. Okay, next slide. So natural support systems. So I think just being here and listening to all of your relationships and all of your journeys of kind of what led you here is kind of the epitome of what this slide is really about. So natural support systems. So as individuals, we do not thrive being on our own. It really takes a village to be able to meet each and every one's needs. And that's okay too. I'm kind of figuring out, where is my natural support systems from? Is it from my biological family? Is it from friends at school? Is it from extracurriculars? And also realizing too that maybe one person can't be everything for you. Maybe if you're having a bad day at school, you call your best friend instead of venting to a caregiver. Maybe if you did bad on an exam, you kind of reach out to maybe a friend that you made through an extracurricular club. So realizing that different people can serve different purposes in your life. Next slide. Okay, so if there's anything that I can leave you with today, I know we talked about different tangible tools and really highlighted our thoughts, feelings, and behavior, but really the purpose of this is just remembering that reinforcing boundaries, practicing that self-empowerment, and also practicing these strategies that we talked about, such as bringing of autonomy to triangle, can actually really help you deal with pressures, but ultimately help you increase your optimal functioning and be the best version of yourself. Thank you.